whose mission is to encourage people to read and value fiction and to support and celebrate its creation and enjoyment. And we do this through public events like this one, reading groups, writing workshops, all offering vibrant, accessible, and inclusive programs that welcome a wide community to experience the joy of story. We have a kids read program that offers immersive reading experiences for children. And we support early career writers with our first novel prize and our Emerging Writers Fellowship. Visit our site, sign up for our mailing list, and then follow us on social media. And to support our work creating a home for readers and writers, please consider becoming a member so that you're tuned into all of our activities and come back and see us soon. And just an example of something that's coming up, Jamie Quattro and Sloane Crosley will be here on October 3rd to talk about Quattro's wildly original novel, Two-Step Devil. For tonight, some important logistics. After the talk, we'll have an audience Q&A, and if you're here in the room, please raise your hands, and our interns will bring you a microphone. That's so the folks who are watching on the live stream can hear you as well. And if you're on the live stream watching, you can add your question in the chat at any time, and we'll read from those before we break for the signing line. Caro was kind enough to pre-sign your books, or the books that you'll be buying soon, hopefully. And we'll be doing a personalization line after the event, just on the other side of this wall. I'll come back with instructions for how that will work. And now on to the main event. While there are many more stories that reflect the LGBTQ plus community being published now, there are still too few stories to capture the diverse experiences that fall under that umbrella. But that doesn't mean that there isn't still also resistance, oppression, and bias. I just read that ex-employees at Pixar are reporting that executives repeatedly told them to make Inside Out 2 less gay. And look at the books that are most banned, which is ironic when you look at the violent misogynistic stories that are foundational to Western society, which is exactly what Caro did when they reached back to Greek myth and retooled it a little bit. It's important to honor the wins, and Caro's novel, The Palace of Eros, is, as they say, Hottogo. So please welcome Caro and Angie Cruz to the stage.
Oh my God, it is so bright here. It's so bright, but oh my God, I'm so happy to have you here. And thank you everyone for coming. How does it feel to be in New York?
Incredible. I love New York. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to the Center for Fiction for hosting us. And thank you, Angie, for coming up here and chatting with me. I'm so grateful.
Of course. You know I'm a super fan. And today is a full moon.
Qué bueno.
Which I have to say, the Palace of Eros, it's right on time with the full moon, right? Like we're in sync. So this is very exciting. I have all the feelings today. I don't know. Have you been feeling the full moon already? Like I've been feeling it. It's been a day. So I think this is the perfect conversation for us to channel that energy. Okay. So I thought, why don't we start by you just telling us what this novel is about, and then just reading a little bit from the beginning. So we start with the work.
Okay. All right. Sounds fabulous. So The Palace of Eros is a queer retelling of the ancient Greek myth of Psyche and Eros, in which the god Eros, aka Cupid, the god of love and desire, is recast as a genderqueer, non-binary lesbian goddess. Yeah, as one does. And I found that making that shift in Eros's identity and queering the transgressive, racy love story at the heart of things opened up all of these layers of burning questions under the surface of this myth I had been obsessed with for 25 years before I started writing the book.
When do you remember being obsessed with this myth? Like you say 25, like what was the moment? Can you remember it?
I do. Well, I don't know if I was 19 or 20, like exactly how old I was, but late teens, right around the time that I came out to myself. I was obsessed with this myth. In fact, I wrote some very bad pages attempting to retell this story at that time. And no, I don't know where they are. No idea.
Oh, I had no idea that you already had the first draft happen when you were 19.
Some kind of first draft.
Oh
yeah.
my God.
Yeah.
I would love to see those pages. Okay, let's hear
Lost
it.
pages.
Let's hear a little bit
So,
of it.
yeah. So I'm just going to read the very first page. It's just a half paragraph, little mini prologue before chapter 1. From the point of view of Eros, the story goes back and forth between Eros and Psyche's points of view. All of time collapses in the immediacy of desire. Eros had known this since before the world began. Perhaps because of that, she should have predicted how loving a mortal woman could topple her, how what happened in that palace with Psyche would shake her, transmute her, bring her to her knees, forever change the way her arrows glittered as they soared. But she didn't predict it, did not see it coming. Eros knew all about ecstasy and passion and transgression. As the goddess of desire, she harnessed these forces, and for centuries she had watched them level the lives of men and gods alike. But this, the question she would burn with later when forced to see the cost of her defiance. Why? Why do it? Why risk everything? Did I do it for her? Or did I do it to be true? And then this is the beginning of chapter 1 from Psyche's point of view. I arrived at her palace by soaring from a rock where I had been left for dead. How I came to be on that rock is not the core of my story, but it's where I'll begin. For all stories have roots, as plants do, as people do, as legends do. In the case of legends, too much distance from the root can twist the tale into a lie. Think of the hordes who want it that way, who obscure on purpose. You've seen it, haven't you? The way they balk at a story with too many sharp edges or unfamiliar colors. How bards and gossips warp a tale to their will. I know why they do it, the allure of audience delight. The trouble comes when feeding that delight means flattening out what gives a story life and power, its wilder shapes, the jagged or the billowed, the spike and fall of songs usually buried under silence. There are truths that some don't want to hear. Without those truths, stories lose their teeth, limbs, bones. It's safer that way for gossips and bards, which is why I don't trust them when it comes to my story with Eros, the story of Eros and me. I wouldn't trust them either if I were you. Sit closer. Let me give you my telling, starting at the root. According to my mother, I arrived in the last hour before sunrise. So fast the village healer didn't come in time, and instead I fell into the trembling hands of a kitchen maid. You burned, my mother said, like an arrow made of sunlight, as if you could shoot through me, as if you had turned my flesh to air. That's how you flew into the world. Insistent you were. You wept that night as if you missed the motion. You were not quiet like your sisters when they were born. This frightened me, so I sang you an old song about the earth, to help you land here, my love, my dear Psyche, to blunt the longing. Girls need that. To be close to the earth, I asked. To stop dreaming of flight. I was 5 then, and entranced by the rare thrill of a walk alone with my mother as we carried the washing from the river. The story landed in me like a welcome stone, forming ripples I was still too young to understand. Later, I would know about flight and girls and dreaming. How a body can be arrow, can be air, can burn.
You know, this idea of a mother seeing her daughter and wanting to blunt the longing, to sort of ground her in earth and like seeing the possibility of what she could be and wanting to temper it down, it to me is, it resonates with me in a really deep level because I feel like, you know, as a daughter of immigrant parents, like from the moment I was born, they say, naciste con la pata caliente, which is you're born with hot feet. That's exactly what it is, right?
Yeah.
And it's everything possible to tamper that down. So, you know, okay, so this is your fifth novel. Sixth novel. Wow. Okay, it's your sixth novel. And wait, what am I missing? I was counting them in my head.
Probably Perla.
Oh, Bella. Oh my God.
Everybody forgets Perla.
Why? Why? Is this like the middle child?
Yeah.
Oh,
She's like the
okay.
little child.
This is your sixth novel. Okay, so this is your sixth novel. And the ones I've read have been very different thematically and formally, right? Which makes you like a really exciting writer to me because I feel like you're always taking a risk in the way that you tackle the work or tackle the topics you care about. So I'm curious, why a Greek myth retelling now for you, especially after The President and the Frog? And why a story about a mother, a daughter, but also like this emergence and coming of age of this young woman through this story?
Yeah, thank you for that question and putting it in that context, right? Because as we continue to write books through the course of a career, we start to see each book as its own whole entity, but also kind of part of a greater river of writing. And it's sort of interesting to look inside the great mirror of that river and see what some of your ongoing obsessive burning questions are. Like, oh, I'm writing about this again. You know, there's some thematic follow-throughs for me through all of my books that only really become entirely visible to my conscious mind once I have written the book. I also, for me, you know, I do write very different books each time, stylistically, aesthetically, structurally. I look for what each book needs from me and try to stretch and grow into what those aesthetic demands might be. And I listen for what book most needs to be written and feels most urgent from all of the ideas that are coming through. It took me 5 novels rooted and set in Latin America and sort of very much within and centering Latinidad to then venture out into ancient Greece. Why this book? Why now? In the pandemic, actually, when the pandemic began, I was going to write a book set in contemporary Uruguay. It was going to involve an enormous amount of primary research of immigrant communities in Uruguay, people who had emigrated from lots of different places into Montevideo. And I had tickets to go to Montevideo, actually, in July of 2020, which is a time that I'm sure we all remember, even if there are ways in which we might not want to. And so, of course, the borders closed, everything shut down. That became impossible. And then I started sort of circling around other possibilities. And what I really felt was this deep desire to write a book that I could fill with queer joy. And that's what got me circling back to this myth. And once I asked myself the question, what if Eros were actually genderqueer and trans and a dyke and all of the above, and this is a very queer story, all of a sudden this myth about 2 people who can only meet in the dark, in a dark room in this palace. I mean, that's part of the original story, right? They have to hide in this dark room and they have this incredible, you know, sexual, joyous relationship, but they have to stay in the dark until one of them feels very drawn to lighting a lamp because reasons, right? And so,
and if you read the myth, you stay pretty close to the myth.
In a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways. So, you know, there's some parts, it's not like we won't spoil it by talking about it, right?
Right, I mean, you could spoil it by Googling, right?
That's true.
In some ways, right? Yeah. But also the queering of the story then opened up questions along the way of like, what does the narrative arc need, you know, in the creating of it?
I'm curious, I don't have any, are there any writers here? Because this is like an interesting question for me as a writer. It's like, when you thought about the myth, how did because this is the first time you've actually used the constraint of using, is this the first time you use something like a myth and retell it like that?
Well,
because the President and the Frog also does like a fable kind of
I was going to say the closest thing to this, and one of my sort of maybe training grounds preparing me to write this was maybe The President and the Frog.
Right.
Because it's not the retelling of a myth, but it is a kind of reimagining of an actual historical, event, which is the former president of Uruguay, José Mujica, was a political prisoner during the Uruguayan dictatorship, and it was said that he in part survived and kept his sanity by talking to a frog. And so I was left wondering what those conversations were with the frog. So I used a lot of sort of real life elements and then kind of fashioned a narrative arc out of that. And it's a combination of wild reimagining and research. In some ways, the fact that all of my other novels could in some way be perceived as historical fiction also prepared me to kind of write, just deeper into time. Just a couple thousand more years back.
So because it is, we have the full moon, and I'm having my feelings. I'm sure a lot of you are too. I was thinking that in the spirit of joy, and that you wrote this, to feel this queer joy and to have this immersive experience as a reader, I thought that it would be really wonderful in the honor of the full moon if you could read a section from the book that I really liked, which is right before something happens. At least I don't want to say too much. I just want you to read it. But it does show the yearning of the ecstatic. Would you mind reading a little bit of it? Are we all ready for
some
the meat
yearning
of the book?
Yeah,
I think so.
I think I know exactly what you're asking me to read.
I think it was page 92 in my notes.
Okay.
Just a little bit. I want people to hear.
Right before things get going.
Yes.
So this Psyche, she's been through a lot. She's a mortal woman. She's, long story, but she's been sort of thrown away by her family and her village, left for dead. Purportedly, according to the oracle, she's going to be married off to a monster. She's going to have a marriage that's monstrous. Instead, she ends up in this palace with this dark room with shockingly, a woman who says, "You're married to me, and you can be here and be free. All I ask is that 2 rules, that the light stays off in this room at all times, and you never ask me who I am."
I love this.
You love this?
Like as a practice in life.
As a practice in life? Here are my rules. These are the constraints. Pick a safe word, in we go.
Exactly.
Right?
Go ahead.
So Psyche doesn't have an explicit safe word, but she sort of energetically has one. And she comes into the room every night, and Eros says in the dark, "What's your pleasure?" And she says, "Sing to me." And that's the only thing she asks for many nights. And that's all she gets, because she doesn't ask for anything else. And now she's started to have other feelings arise. 10 nights passed, 11. I grew restless. I still loved her song, but something else rose up in me, an undercurrent of frustration, like the hum of a bee trapped in a house. She sang and did not touch me. Not even the hand on my hair of the first night, fingers tracing grooves in the strands. She did nothing I had not asked for. I ached. I fumed. The hum swelled in me. At night, by her side, my body shouted for her, desperate to press close to her, a sensation that dizzied me, for I had never experienced it before. My own body, a stranger to me, a greedy, wailing stranger. What was this? What was I? During the day, I paced the groves, splashed my legs in the stream, skin bright with something I could not name. I yearned for sun, wind, touch, monstrousness. I yearned to feel alive. I felt alive, hounded by my own aliveness. I cupped stream water toward me with both hands, drenched myself, thought of her and could not breathe. What's happening to me, I thought, and what's possible between me and this woman? Was she fine with continuing this way? With endless nights of singing and nothing more? Had she not wanted a real bride after all? Had I been a fool to imagine she wanted something else? Had I been the deviant? Wild Psyche, rotten Psyche, You invented a monstrosity all on your own. Over meals, on walks, as I sat at the loom, weaving a tapestry out of finer thread than I'd ever used before, a simple design, 2 alternating colors, for fear of what would happen if I let my imagination merge with the motion of the threads given the tumult inside my mind, I saw visions of what else I might ask for, what else might be your pleasure, things I should not think of and should not want, even now, as a bride could not allow myself to want. Her hand in my hair, her body near mine, her body on mine, her hands on me, her hands moving along me. Would they be hard or supple, fast or slow, or her mouth on my neck? Then what? I fractured, felt some part of me buckle and sweetly come apart. I had to leap up from the loom and pace to stay inside my skin. I was not entirely inside my skin. I ached at the edge of then what? I could not disentangle the threads of my curiosity and desire. They twined into a rope so fierce it took my breath away. I was taut with it. On walks, the sun seemed to pierce right through my skin, reaching the core of me. At the loom, the tangle of my mind spilled out into the weave, creating chaos. Loops and spikes of wool appeared beneath my hands. For this I scolded myself, undoing the gnarls and knots with trembling fingers. Careful, Psyche. You might be wrong about all of this. It could be that you've completely misunderstood. She might just be a rich woman driven mad by loneliness who, in that madness, devised a plan to ease the solitude. A bride in a room with no light. It made no sense, but nothing about this palace made sense, not without stretching my understanding of reality into new shapes. I was stretching into new shapes. I had become large inside, hungry, unrecognizable to myself. On the 13th night, I finally broke our nightly ritual. We began as usual, but after a few moments of her singing, I said, "That's enough." "It is not your pleasure?" "Not now." Then. A single word, and yet, to me, it thundered. I had spent that afternoon prowling the halls of the house, wondering, thinking, what did I crave from her, with her? I did not fully know, but I knew some things. I knew that when she was close, I came alive. That in the morning, her absence hollowed me. I knew that the longing for her hands on me had become intense, a thirst that swallowed me whole and filled my days. None of this fit in the realm of the real according to the world I had known before this palace, but it didn't matter. I was no longer of that world, and what my body knew eclipsed all the things I had been taught, obliterated it all, shouted for space. I wanted to press against her more than I had ever wanted anything. Still, I could not speak. How to shape words around the unspoken. How to make any sound. Unthinkable to give voice to anything so dangerous, unthinkable to stay silent and risk losing this chance. This chance. At what? My mouth opened in the dark, sound caught in my throat, darkness in my throat. A chance at everything, I thought, to hear only what's inside me, shouting true. I want to let the rest of the world's noise dissolve, even if only for one night. I don't know what I am or who I am, but tonight, right now, I know what I want. And so what if the laws of gods and men would slay me for it? Who cares? They already tried to slay me, and here I am. I want you to show me. She went completely still. She seemed to be listening, as if waiting for further explanation, as if the obvious question hung already in the air. Show you what? But I could not speak it. She could not make me speak it. If she tried to make me, the gate would close. But she did not. Instead, A hand arrived on my cheek with the delicacy of a bird's wing and hovered there. My breath caught in my throat. I arched toward her palm, and that, my body's language, was enough response to the question the hand was asking. For it could work that way, I realized. A body had the power to ask, answer, speak. She fell upon me, kissing my face, neck, chest, her body on mine, naked, her hands on me, seeking, finding, stroking gently and not gently at all. What startled me most was not her ferocity, but my own thirst for it, the way the ache in me intensified, expanded, as if in recognition. I felt alive, like a plant suddenly doused in light. I burned for her in the places where she touched me, burned to know what she would do next. I'll stop there. Thank you.
You know, I was thinking about when Cantoras was published, and we had a conversation. I'm very fortunate. I've had many conversations with you throughout the years, and I remember that there was pushback on the sex scenes in Cantoras.
Ah, yes.
And I remember your defense that sex belongs in literary fiction. Like, why is there this pushback on having sex in literary fiction? So this feels like Caro Unleashed. So it's a very different moment in history, in our literary history, right? Like, there's just so many more books. There's a lot more representation. How do you feel as a writer from the writing Cantoras and sort of getting that pushback and having to negotiate what is possible in books, and then as a writer now?
Yes. I remember those conversations and all of the amazing conversations we've been able to have over the years. Cantoras came out in 2019, and it's a portrait of 5 queer women who befriend each other during the Uruguayan dictatorship in the mid-70s and follows their friendship, loves, and survival over 35 years. And the sex that they have, the daring queer sex that they have, feels, incredibly key and important, crucial to their full story. And there was this incredible pushback to not only the sex, but also the portrayal of female phallic energy, right? The sort of the first strap-on in Uruguay creation scene in that book was very controversial in the editorial process, with a different editor and a different publisher than the Palace of Eros. And I just have to say, my editor may or may not be in the room. Yes, Michelle Herrera Mulligan is an absolutely brilliant editor. And to work with somebody so visionary and fearless in writing queer erotics has been an absolute joy. And I also feel incredibly proud that this book is the first work of fiction published by Atria Primero Sueño Press, a new Latinx imprint.
This is a big deal, actually. Yeah, in this moment in publishing, it's a big deal.
Yeah, to have a Latinx imprint, and I'm incredibly delighted to be part of it. So that's this piece about being able to be in an editorial relationship and container where the queer sexuality and expression of queer desire and longing and trans and or genderqueer desire and longing and bodily truths are taken seriously as being worthy of literary attention is really incredible. I mean, my first novel, The Invisible Mountain, took me 8 years to write, and it came out in 2009. So I was writing it starting in 2000. There's a character that's a trans woman. One of the protagonists is a woman who falls in love with this trans woman. I've been writing these themes. I've been writing, transness and queer desire into my books since the beginning, but it's always been such a fight. And then Gods of Tango, my third novel, came out in 2015 and has a main character who can be read as a masculine lesbian who passes as a man in 1913 Buenos Aires in the era of the Guardia Vieja del Tango, or it can be read as a transmasculine character, and it really is a both and. And that book came out in 2015, and it got pushed back for being perceived as being two separate books. Why did you have to write two separate books in one? Like you couldn't write about queerness and Latinidad in one book. And I'm
James
like,
Baldwin problem.
it is. I mean, this is an ancient. This is
Right.
a conversation with very deep roots
Right.
in literary culture, and yet here we were still having it in the 21st century.
Right.
And I think it's a conversation we need to keep having until we can, really push open the space, not just for my books and your books, but for all of the books and for all of the stories and for all of the communities and verdades, to be able to be fully fleshed and full-blooded and alive on the page.
Well, what I think also too, like it is true in seeing how our work develops, but since it's your day, thinking about how there is something liberated in the way the prose are written in this book, where the sex just takes up the space, the desire overwhelms the space. And, you were speaking of safe words. So I started thinking about kink, right? And craft. Have anyone ever thought about kink and craft and how much it has in common? Because
What a coincidence.
we used to have this conversation. And I remember having this conversation with Caro about, I was reading Terrence Hayes' book, Watch Your Language, and he was saying about craft in the poem. He's a poet, this wonderful African-American poet that I adore. And he was saying that craft unleashes what is beyond craft, right? So he always thinks, is the poem a machine or is it an animal, right? So craft is like the machine that allows for the animal, the poem to become animal, right? So then I asked Caro, I was like, well, expert. Let's talk about kink. What do you think? Do you think that kink could be like the craft? So if kink, you said to me, kink controls to unleash.
When
the
did I
body.
say that?
You said that. You wrote it down, and I wrote it
I
down
said
in my
that to
notes.
you, like in a text?
Kink controls to unleash, right? Like craft controls to unleash, right? So then I started thinking, interesting, is it possible that because you have the constraint of the myth, you were able to unleash? I wonder.
What a great question. I wonder too.
You never thought about this?
No, I never thought about that. But it is possible, right? The constraint of the myth gives us already a story arc, right? A narrative arc, lots of narrative tension, right? There's drama in the old myths, right? I mean, these Greek gods, they're a full-on telenovela kind of energy,
Right.
I mean, big things are happening all the time, and there's trials, and so, I definitely, there's already a story that can allow for sort of narrative transport. And I wanted narrative transport, the pleasures of staying up too late, turning pages of a book because it's gripping, for that to be there. But then on the inside of the story, there's also all these erotic nights. And so the container that the myth gives, where it's like, and then there are all of these erotic nights, gives a lot of space to dive in and to be in that part of the story and to maybe unleash in sexual narration, right? And in exploring what it means for each of them, what it means to their bodies, what it means to their sense of self, to engage erotically the way they do in the dark.
You seem very comfortable writing in this way. And I'm curious, as a teacher, do you teach the craft of writing sex? Are you comfortable teaching it? I'm curious, how people write it so badly often. And I wonder, what is it? Is it because, I don't know, do you have any advice?
I'm actually, I teach an MFA program at San Francisco State University. And I actually, at the request of graduate students, I'm actually teaching a seminar next semester called The Real Thing, Writing the Erotic.
Oh, you are?
Semester long. Yeah, because they're like, let's dive in. But before that, I taught a graduate seminar. Once I got tenure, I was like, okay, we're just doing this. We're doing this. We're teaching, we're centering BIPOC voices, we're centering queer and trans voices, we're centering, I'm going to bring the full passion to the classroom. And we had a class called What the Body Knows, Trans and Gender Nonconforming Narratives, and we read all trans and gender nonconforming writers all semester. We started with Stone Butch Blues. We went all over. And, in that journey, it was like what the body knows. And I think that is a thematic that we can follow for writing sex or for writing the erotic, which is both. Writing the erotic is more of an umbrella, right? That's not just writing sex, the actual scene in which people are having sex. It's also writing the desire, right? The longing, right? You asked me to read a section that's really about longing. She's like, I want things. What is this wanting? And for a character like Psyche, and for many of us living in patriarchy, right? We were told not to want or not to listen to the real truth of our want. And so even just being in the truth of our desire, knowing it and being awake to it can be a radical act, right? So writing the erotic is also narrating that interior of our lives and of our longing, as well as writing the sex itself. So yeah, rooting in it as a full experience. I think for queer sexuality too, it is a site of liberation. It can be a site of self-discovery. It can be a site of self-expansion. It can be a site of fully experiencing our whole gender. It can be so many. It can be sacred and ecstatic in the moon, the full moon, right? It can be so many things.
I was thinking as you were speaking, because I was going through my mind and saying, oh, when I write sex, it's often sad. And this idea of joy,
I mean, sad things happen,
and it's like
right?
connected to trauma, and somehow that's where the writing goes. Like, it doesn't mean it's my life, but it's like when I think of certain things, like there's like, as being an assault survivor and all these things, right? And
that's
it
real.
is really beautiful to read such a page turner that is so like embodied and immersive, right? That is about pleasure.
I'm so glad.
Right? Like, it is healing. And and you
glad.
actually did say, by the way, if you're all curious, I highly encourage you to read the interview that you did with Julian Delgado Lopera, who is here,
Who
I
is
think.
in the
Wonderful
house.
writer as well.
Incredible writer.
And in that interview, you said, in a queer context, fucking can be a source of incredible power, of healing, of liberation. Joyful queer fucking is dangerous to the dominant system that's designed to keep us diminished and silent.
Wow, I did say that.
You said that. You said that.
Right. It is dangerous to a system that wants us to stay diminished and silent. And I think that's part of what I was trying to get at about, we are large inside, right? We are in, and this maybe also turns us back to this idea of looking in the broad mirror of all of our novels and realizing what themes are under the surface. Because I feel like I'm always writing about what it means to be internally large and want a big, authentic life in a world that wants to shrink us.
Well, that's what the novel's supposed to do, right? Do the thing that life sometimes can't do right away. Like, it's almost like you're projecting what is possible, right?
Right. The novel is such a capacious form, and it is a form that is so well positioned to narrate and portray the interiority of human consciousness. So what a great site for showing our internal enormity, even in the face of societal diminishment. How do we live radiantly in a world that seems bent on our erasure? And does queer fucking have a role in that kind of living radiantly? Is still maybe a radical question. I think it's also, you said the word pleasure, and it's like writing about pleasure, reading about pleasure, hopefully that's pleasurable, it's fun. But also, what are the radical uses of pleasure? Like, I wanted to write in this book about patriarchy.
Yeah, you start with the blunting of longing, right? Like, it's immediately wanted to be, as soon as you see it, you want to clamp it down because it feels dangerous to even have it.
Right. So exactly, as you pointed out, I started out with this, from birth I've been told to blunt my longing. And that was 2,500 years ago, but as you pointed out, some of us growing up as immigrant girls remember hearing that in the 20th century, right?
Yeah, no, it's really wonderful. I'm curious about, I don't know, like, I know you, and I've been in this beautiful process of listening to you write this book, And I also know like that you have little Easter eggs in there that nobody, like people who know will know because you go so deep in the research and you've been thinking about these things so long. And this book is really building on a long history of trans and queer people, rewriting history, but also like all the Latin American traditions and myths and fables that you've been reading and talking about for so long. What's in here? Like, I'm curious of an anecdote of research that you kind of included in here that makes us all feel like insiders.
Oh, if you like know the secret.
Yeah.
Well, there's
that we might miss.
Yeah, there's layers of that because I am such a research nerd.
I
mean, I'm
know.
a big nerd. You know how nerdy I am. And so I go deep with the research. So I read a lot of classical scholarship, a lot of history, what we do and don't know about especially women and girls' lives in ancient Greece, the colonization of southern Italy, because I realized that if I set the book in southern Italy, which was colonized by the Greeks, I could bring in themes of colonization and indigeneity and lost languages that matter to me as a Latinx writer. And of course I read or reread a lot of ancient Roman and Greek texts, Sophocles, Aeschylus, Ovid's Metamorphoses, of course. And the book that has the first known recorded version of the myth, Psyche and Eros myth, which is by Apuleius. It's called, I kid you not, The Golden Ass. That's what it's called. It's called The Golden Ass. So I read that, of course, in 4 different translations, because as a translator, I know that, when you read various translations, it's sort of in the space between the translations that you can capture the spirit of the original. And then I read a lot of trans and queer theory, also to kind of construct Eros' character in particular, who is transmasculine, non-binary, gender fluid, has her expansive gender. In terms of a particular Easter egg that I put in there, so I took a story from Plato's Republic. So I was reading, like the Plato and the Sophocles. I'm like, why is it, the men write down and record these stories and they get all the credit, right? But who's to say that these stories weren't sort of wisdom story folk tales, that the men then took and took credit for? Quién sabe, right? So there's a story from Plato's Republic about an invisibility ring, about a shepherd who finds an invisibility ring and puts it on, and when he realizes that people can't see him if he turns the ring a certain way, he's able to go and sleep with the king's wife, sleep with the queen, and kill the king. And sorry for the spoiler of the Plato's Republic story, but it's been around for a long time. And so anyway, then he becomes king, and it's a story about morality, like if people are, men are immoral if they can do things in the dark. And I thought, doing things in the dark, right? And so Psyche has these jealous sisters who are going to tell her, you can't trust this husband that you can't see in the light. They still think the husband is male, but there's that part of the original myth. So one of the sisters, I have her tell the story at the table to her sisters, but she says, I learned this story from one of the maids who heard it around the fire. And this is a story that the maids told each other around the fire when all the day's work was done. And they just tell each other stories to keep each other warm and but really it's this brilliant, kind of has lived through time, philosophical wisdom story. So I kind of put it in the, in the mouths of the maids.
This is really wonderful for a first date. So I was thinking about books, right? And I said, okay, some of us are reading our books on our phone. So what is the purpose of this object, right? Why do we still need this object? And did you hear about what's going on in Spain, where at between 7 to 9, if you go to a certain supermarket, if you put your pineapple upside down in the cart, it means that you're looking for connection.
No.
And if you put a lettuce, it means that you want a fling. But if you put a bottle of wine, it means you want something that will age well. And I was
This is like a Spanish straight version of the hanky code.
But I was like, amazing. Why hasn't something caught on in the U.S.? I was like, what if when we go to events with books, we carry a book? And the question is, I know something about that book.
Oh. Oh, see, that's good.
Like maybe we could come up with some
As-
game that we just put it in shopping carts
Mhm,
at
just
certain
walk
times
around.
of the day. And then everyone will know. This is going to go viral, by the way.
This is gonna go viral.
Everyone's going to be like,
The
oh my
Palace of
God, the
Eros."
Palace of Eros. Okay, erotic connection. No, I'm joking. But I'm actually not joking. I think it could work. But
You think it could work?
Yeah.
And if you dog-eared
and now you're
page
tell-
92.
And now I'm gonna use your story and say, actually, I have this story. Like, I know this thing because
I don't
that you might not have caught right away.
That
But-
story about the ring.
And now you have
Play-Doh.
like something to say on your first date. Okay.
There you go.
But okay,
I love that.
before we open it up for questions, I
Yes,
do want to
yes.
talk about while you were working on this book, you were also doing this incredible project where you were recording and visiting with elders. Could you please tell us more about that project? That is your next book, actually, that's coming out very soon. Could you?
Yeah. For the first time in my life, I'm publishing 2 books 10 months apart,
Wild.
which is really wild. I know I have like friends like my friend, the amazing writer Aya De Leon. She's like she writes these sort of thriller romantic heists, and so she's used to doing more than 1 book less than a year apart. When you do genre. But for some of us, this is a really wild ride. So my next book is called So Many Stars: An Oral History of Trans, Non-Binary, Genderqueer, and Two-Spirit People of Color. And it is drawing on these oral histories that I did. And I was part of this incredible cohort, the Baldwin Emerson Fellowships. This was a project spearheaded by the incredible writer and MacArthur Fellow Jacqueline Woodson, who is, a New Yorker. From these stomping grounds. And she selected 10 distinguished writers from across the country. Well, they're all distinguished, that's for sure. To gather oral histories of people of color, elders of color from different communities. And then my project was queer and trans elders of the West Coast. Mm-hmm. And I made a decision to focus on trans and gender nonconforming elders because I feel like even within the undertold stories of queerness and the undertold stories of queer communities of color, even within that, that's an undertold set of stories, is the trans and non-binary and genderqueer and two-spirit folks. So that was about 2/3, about 20 of the people that I interviewed. So I went up and down the coast and to Arizona in 2022, 2023, while I was writing this book, while I was creating this character of Eros, this kind of ancient and divine image of transmasculinity and gender fluidity and or butchness, kind of very much kind of an in-between because I'm writing this book without our contemporary 21st century lexicon of queerness and transness, right? Eros doesn't have any of those words that I just named. She's just experiencing her inner vastness and wanting to create room in the universe for it, in a universe that is patriarchal. So it was just incredibly inspiring. I mean, I just did these amazing interviews and was completely blown away by these, Latinx, trans, and genderqueer elders and indigenous elders, two-spirit and non-binary elders, and Black and Asian elders, and was really humbled by hearing all of the courageous ways that they not only lived and survived, but innovated space within their cultures and communities, and broke the ground for where we are today and who it's possible for us to be today. And their stories are just also an incredible tribute to the fact that we have always existed. Queer and trans folks have always existed in every community, in every part of the world, throughout time. And it's so important to find ways to lift that up and fill the silences of our official histories.
Before we turn to questions, I wanted to say I'll save it. Okay. There's not a lot of time. All right. Anyone have questions? There's a lot of questions. I knew there would be a lot of questions. I was going to say who's the publisher, so please let us know if you answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it.
Good.
But so I was really taken with Eros in this depiction, especially because she is one of the first deities to like come into existence, and you talk about it in the book. And I thought that was so incredible to see her go through that kind of realization about herself through the book. And I was wondering when you were doing your research, or maybe like also 20 years ago when you were, thinking about Psyche and Eros for the first time and becoming obsessed with that, if there were any other characters in Greek myth that you kind of like were thinking about as you wrote this and were like maybe like, oh, like they could also, I think, have a journey like this, or if Eros was like really the one that you kind of stuck with, which obviously became a whole book and worked out. But like, if there's anyone else that you in your mind were like, I would really love to see their story retold now.
In terms of the Greek myths. Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. And it sounds like you read the book. Thank you so much for reading.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I'm so glad. I'm really glad, grateful that you read and that you enjoyed it. Definitely Eros. One of the things that's so fascinating about Eros as a deity, and I should back up and say that my hope is that this book is accessible to people regardless of whether you're really into the Greek myths or don't care about them at all, remember a lot about them from childhood or don't know a thing, right? That it's that ultimately there's plenty of entry points. But Eros is simultaneously a deity and then sort of this primordial life force, right? Because Eros is the life force. And in ancient Greek mythology, there's this understanding that Eros existed even before the deity did, as one of the first forces. Like how the world came about, there was Gaia, the earth goddess. Gaia breathed, and there was just Gaia and the sky. But because Eros existed in the ether, Gaia felt longing and desire. And so she looked up at the sky, and she had an erotic connection with the sky. And from there came the Titans and the gods and humans and all the rest of us, according to the myth. So that's a deep pull. In terms of my own personal keen curiosity and interest, I've always loved Artemis. And she doesn't show up much in this book. She's not there much, and I think that's just this story, right? It would have been a kind of insertion on my part of something that wasn't very present. I think she's an incredible goddess, but I would say another place of obsession is Daphne, the story of Daphne and Apollo, which does show up in the book, and is important because some of the versions of Daphne and Apollo involve and implicate Eros. So because Apollo was chasing Daphne, and Daphne is one of the many nymphs, one of the many nymphs in Greek mythology who gets raped by a god, because the god is like, I've decided I want this nymph. The nymph is like, I do not consent, and the male god is like, I don't care, right? So there's a lot of rape in these stories, and Daphne gets turned into a tree. For those who don't know the story, that's how the laurel tree is born. And so it's this complicated thing that she got free. She was able to resist rape, but she also had to become a tree. And I think that story speaks on a very deep level to me about the kinds of costs of decisions that we make to navigate survival and agency and consent in living in a world that's stacked against us, living in a patriarchal or misogynistic world. So that one I was able to weave into the book.
Thank you.
Thanks.
How do they know how amazing trees are? They communicate.
Well, that's the other part. Pero sí, that's one of the layers of the myth. It's like, it's not so simple as to say she lost or she won, right? It's like, what did happen? What meaning do we make out of her treeness? It's a very very layered symbol, Yes? Hi.
So maybe for the first 2/3 of the book, I really struggled with the issue of power and imbalance, and had to remind myself, I know this author, I trust this author, but that was something I really struggled with in the growth of their relationship. So I'm curious how you negotiated that in building this relationship between them. How you felt about reconciling that imbalance as you came to a close, and how Eros's fluidity maybe changed the way that, or shaped the way that you were negotiating that. amidst like patriarchy and all of these other things going on?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for asking it. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for your trust, and also thank you for your honesty about that place where you maybe grappled with a part of the book. It is a tricky part because we have this incredibly sexy story happening in the dark, but at the same time, how is consent playing out and how is power playing out, right? Psyche is mortal. She has no power in the family she comes from. She's cast out. She's just told to go to this palace. And then Eros is immortal and has divine powers. And so the power imbalance, is present. And that's part of the tension in their relationship. And that's one of the reasons I wrote into it the way I did, where, Eros is saying, "What's your pleasure every night?" And Psyche says, "I just want you to sing for me." Was a way of trying to weave in, like, how does Psyche get to a place of genuine consent, right? Because the original myth doesn't necessarily give us the structures of how she would come to a place of genuine consent in that power relationship. And so then I think the second half of the book, because, not to give too many spoilers, but in the Googleable version of the myth, there is a rupture, right? Dramatic things happen. And through the course of that rupture and that shattering of trust and that questioning of each other's approaches to things, and the questioning, Psyche's questioning of Eros's rules and establishing rules and constraints onto her admittedly happy life, she starts to say, well, what if I want more? And so I think that's a really important conversation about power, where it becomes more nuanced. And then Eros has to go on her own journey, right, of looking at her own internal masculinity. And if she wants to be fully rooted in her masculinity and be with a woman, where does she need to look at the places where her masculinity might be about dominating, and she needs to recalibrate that? And also, where are the places where, as a masculine, gender fluid, assigned female at divine birth person, right? Like, how is Eros also dealing with her own wounding, right? And her own wounding of how she's been told that she can't be her whole self and she can't be her full masculine self, right? She's been told this by Zeus, by the heavens, even though she's divine, she's constrained around her full gender. So how does she attend to her own wounds in order to more fully see the person in front of her? I just tried to really let all of the complicated layers come forward. And life is sticky, right? Life is sticky and complicated. And we want to think that if we're queer, we come out and then we can be in paradise, right? And then we have our queer relationships and everything is so good and right and peaceful. And it can be, and it's amazing to come out and make our queer relationships. So what happens when rupture arises, when power dynamics arise? What do we do?
Thank you. I think it's so important that we see that in queer stories as well. So thank you.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Thank you so much.
Hi, Caro.
Hi. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's me, Christabel.
Hi, Christabel. It's so amazing to see you. Thank you for coming.
Oh, great to be here. I can't wait to read this book.
Oh,
I'm
thank you.
kind of saving it as a treat. And then I'm going to listen to it on audiobook.
Amazing.
My question is, for Gods of Tango, you told us at Las Dos Brujas, Cristina Garcia's workshop a while ago, you told us about your research process for Gods of Tango and how you learned to play the violin and how you became a tango dancer and how you embodied this amazing research into the book. I was wondering, as a writer, how did you embody this book? How did you research it? Because it's 2,500 years ago, a myth.
Right. What a good question. And thank you for that. And that was the Las Dos Brujas workshop in 2017, where I had the pleasure of reading part of your novel in progress. And I still can't wait for that ongoing project.
Yeah, I actually escaped from my the fellowship at Grub Street you recommended me for tonight. So I did the workshop earlier today, and then I ran over here.
Oh,
So
congrats on the workshop. All right, the work of literary production continues. That's fabulous. Yeah, with the Gods of Tango, I did a lot of embodied research. Like you said, playing the violin, dancing. I was never a good tango dancer, but studying the craft. I stopped short of studying weaving here. Psyche is a weaver, and that was really important for me to give her an artistic impulse. And because she does have all of this erotic energy going through her life, all of this sexual joy and pleasure, but that also translates into life force, right? So Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic as power, is such a incredibly seminal, essential essay in which she writes about how once we experience the erotic within ourselves, we come to demand that kind of excellence in other aspects of our lives, and that was something that I wanted to bring to her at the loom. But I didn't get a loom for this one. I didn't get a loom. I tried to, like writing the nature of the orchard. I'm lucky I live in California, and we have a lot of the Mediterranean. We have a very similar climate to Mediterranean climate, so we have a lot of the similar trees. So like looking at, fig trees and, different kinds of flora, that happened. But I think, like even actually the uses of the erotic, this isn't exactly embodied research, but it's a piece of my research, is I really wanted to sort of radically write my way into the spirit of that essay in this book. And I actually have an epigraph from the essay at the beginning of the book. Of course, women so empowered are dangerous. And I took the essay and I printed it out as part of writing this book, and I cut it, and I cut sentences out, and I just had all of these little sentences, and I put them in a box, and I did all these, when I was writing, sometimes like for half an hour before I started going into the actual writing, I would toss them and pull one out, kind of a little bibliomancy, or I would take them and rearrange them and put them into little starbursts or in different orders, just to try to kind of reread them and unlock different parts of what I think is an incredibly just profound text, to try to get under it and inside of it. So that was one thing I did.
Thank you.
So no research in dark rooms?
Can I decline to state?
There seems to be a troublemaker.
I know. That's maybe a
blunt. We need to blunt that arrow.
Blunt the arrow, blunt the longing. I can neither confirm nor deny the joyful research in dark rooms, or non-dark rooms, as the case may be.
And we have time for one more question.
Okay, I'll take the mic. So I'm wondering, and Angie, if you want to answer this too, that would be great. What advice you might have to a queer trans writer at the very beginning of their writing journey, experiencing workshops and what happens there to help them keep going?
Yeah, Angie, do you want to speak to that?
I mean, I'm a director of an MFA program.
Yeah, you got a lot of amazing things to say.
And I just feel like it's so different than it was when I went to an MFA program. When I was in the MFA program, like there would be one of each of everything, like one Latino.
Yeah.
If there was, maybe.
Maybe one.
Mm-hmm. There would be one person that was out, like maybe they were queer and they weren't even out in the workshop yet, right? Because we were so young. And now that's not true. Like the workshops I teach, they're so like layered. I think what's exciting is that everyone's outside of whatever identity box or whatever thing they're struggling or being with. And what I recommend is read widely. What you've discovered through all these stories is that the stories have been told through people. If you go and read in other languages, like translations, you discover there's all this literature that can help become part of your conversation if you feel isolated. Read a lot more of Caro De Robertis. That's what I would say.
Read a ton
Julia
of Angie
Lopera.
Cruz. I recommend your work to graduate students all the time.
I think like part of it is reading widely and looking for mentors that see you. And one thing too with young writers, there's like the unexpected mentor. You always go. I feel like a lot of people go into a workshop thinking that someone's going to be their reader or their mentor or the person that's going to know exactly what they're trying to do in their work. And what they realize is that that's not always true. Sometimes the most unexpected person in the room is actually the person that truly sees your work. And that's how I tell this to everybody. I'm like, you really don't know who your allies are until you're in an experience with them. Like, you really don't know. You think it's someone that's more like you, or, but then you realize, oh, wait. So I think that generosity and curiosity about other people is like really useful in writing.
Curiosity about other people and about other texts, like you
Right.
said, reading widely, like reading things that feel potentially unexpected to you or that are across demographics, but that are perhaps aesthetically nourishing or innovative, or reading just a lot of different styles, reading translated work, and finding your people, which can look a lot of different ways.
A lot of different ways.
Right.
In a lot of different places, right? Even in spaces like this, like people find each other if you stay open, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And over time, you can build your own community, your people, your crew. I think it's really important to have some kind of crew of peer support as writers, whatever that looks like, and to nourish those relationships and to keep them with you as you grow along the way, because you need that when you're emerging, when you're working on your first novel or your first book, but you also need it throughout the process, right? I mean, this was my 6th novel, but it was so important to me to have writers whom I trust and respect to be able to show the first version of the manuscript and say, what do you think? And
Isn't it also really scary to do that?
Yes.
I still feel scared. I'm like, who will I share my work with? I feel like I don't even know. I know I could share it, but it's so scary.
It was so incredible for me when I read the first draft of How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water that December when you were going deep with it. Oh, that was amazing.
And then you asked all these questions and I had to rewrite it.
You did not have to rewrite it, but also it was so glorious, and it was just discovering it, and it was just it's such an incredible novel. What folks read How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water? Can we get a hand for How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water? That book. I mean, I got to be one of the first people to say, Angie, it's glorious.
You were such a cheerleader. It really helped.
See, so
it really helped.
Get yourself a crew.
I was very scared, and Shadow made it okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like literature is this like, long, raucous, enormous conversation, and it's a conversation between writers and readers. It's a conversation between texts. And so see yourself as listening to that conversation and then also like making a contribution to that conversation for yourself, for what it feels urgent to you, the vision that you have that you want to bring into the world through you, but also to make a contribution to the greater literary ecosystem, which needs all of it.
So thank you so much, Caro. Buy the book, support this book. I mean, I always say, like, vote and register. That's really important. Like, we need to vote. We really do. But I also think what we buy votes for the kind of thing that we want in the world, right? So if you have the money to buy the book, ask for it in your libraries. This book is really special. We want to see a lot more books like this in the world. It's important to support it. So, and it's also great. I recommend reading it in bed.
All right, you have your instructions. The books are over at the bookstore, and then Caro is going to be right on the other side of this wall to personalize the books. Thank you all so much for coming.